today.
Hold on. Let me make sure do you have, is
You
my
look
lighting
good to
good enough for
me.
you?
I think you're fine.
I don't have a green screen. I
No, no
apologize.
worries. No worries. Yeah, it's all good. I I don't know about you, but I feel like I kind of got caught in when this first started. I didn't know how long it was going to last, and so I didn't necessarily get all the infrastructure. And then by the time you realize this is going to last a while, you couldn't get your hands on anything because everything was sold out. And then now you're kind of in the position of, well, now that I can actually get my hands on it, do I want it because I'm theoretically going to go back on the road? Maybe in the next few months. I don't know. I don't know. But anyway. Well, good morning. We've had a fantastic conversation in the pre-show. I almost feel kind of bad that I didn't start streaming before schedule here, but that's okay. We're going to try to touch on at least a few of the things that we discussed in the last half hour. And Sharat, I think I'll have to have you on again because I know we've got a hard stop here coming up. So I'll have to try to get back on your calendar so we can. I know we're not going to get to everything I want to get to today. So good morning. Why don't you give us your bio, your origin story, and then we'll try to recreate what we just talked about for the last half hour.
Oh, that'd be beautiful, beautiful. First off, I say thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.
It's great to get connected with you and your community, and actually your community, our community. It's ours, right? So yeah, like the five nickel tour. My name is Sharat Chander, a longtime member of the Java team. I'm going to mention a company name that some might remember, some may not, but I started off the majority of my tech career started off at Sun Microsystems way back in December of 2000 when they took a chance on a very unskilled developer who was coming out of telco, those old telephone companies that used to run copper to your house and provide telephone service before the whole notion of mobile. So came out of Verizon, which used to be Bell Atlantic, which used to be the Chesapeake Telephone Company. Boy, I'm losing a lot of listeners right now because they're like, well, that you must be really old. Well, you can't tell with the gray hair, can you? And yeah, been working on so many aspects of Java for the last 20 plus years, and I've considered myself pretty damn lucky to still be with the team responsible for putting out probably one of the most utilized technologies in all of our lifetime. So
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty damn humbling, to say the least.
Well, and we talked about this, but I wore this shirt just for you because this is the old school, and it even has that logo you just mentioned. So, this is vintage. This was in the I don't wear this often for reasons as you and I discussed. I like this shirt quite a bit, and I don't want it to disappear, so I keep it in just for special occasions. It's a dress up shirt, maybe. I don't know. But
You know what? At this point, it is definitely formal wear. And yeah, but you know what? Regardless of formal wear or not, that logo you carry on your chest, that I carry on my chest, has had such deep rooted meaning for so many. Whether
mhm.
it's for the last 25 years or even more recently, it has survived the test of time, and I sort of feel like um, it still has so much more to go. Like
Yeah.
last year, we celebrated Java's 25th birthday back on May 23rd of 2000, and I pinched myself, going, it didn't seem all that long.
No.
It really didn't. But to see how pervasive it's become, how many industries it's touched and is continuing to touch, how it continues to evolve to stay relevant with modern programming paradigms. There's another 25 years and beyond ahead for Java, and that's what's so encouraging to me,
Yeah.
is to know that not everyone starts on Java. We're fine and okay to say that. Like I understand there's other choices, which, by the way, very important point to make. Like, I am not going to sit here and tell you thou must use Java in every situation that you're presented with. But it sure is valuable
Hmm.
choice that you can consider. Choice matters. Pick the right framework, the right tool, the right library, the right API for the task at hand. It should be project based, right? So your project may not start on Java, but
Right.
it may eventually evolve there just because of all the, as I call it, the illities.
Yes.
I know sometimes I lose developers with illities, but like, you know, affordability, programmability, approachability, performance, stability, security, all of those things matter. And Java has been tested the times of uh, of of how technology has evolved to take that into account.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think part of what what I've always enjoyed so much about Java is its ability to adopt good ideas from other languages. And I give a lot of credit to Brian Getz et al. For being able to have that vision and pulling things in. And, because it's really easy, especially when you've been as successful as a technology, to say, well, we know the right way to do it. And what do you whippersnappers know? But there are good ideas out there, and tip of the hat for pulling as many of those in as is possible while
Yeah.
maintaining, the stability and reliability and whatnot.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm going to give accolades and name drop now.
Please
Not, but
do.
not intended to name drop, right? So it is so refreshing that our architects have their eye on not just the past from a historical standpoint, but an eye on the future.
Yep.
So, Brian Getz, who's our language architect, Mark Reinhold, who is our overall architect, they want to ensure that the promises of Java from 25 years ago are the promises for the next 25 years, like ease of use, security, multiple target environments that you can build your application on, and as well as evolve to make it
Yeah.
more approachable. And, it's okay to say that there was a point that we all recognize it. There's some rough edges or guardrails to Java that may not make it as approachable as some of these new modern languages that are coming out. I get it. Yes, we have to work on reducing the verbosity of Java. We're doing that. We have a master project in the OpenJDK project called Project Amber. And inside of Amber, the entire goal is to ensure that we make Java more readable, more writable, more approachable, and more maintainable. Because as you probably know,
Hmm.
you might author or participate in a project 5 years from now. Someone else might pick it up because you're off on the next thing. And that transition you want to have as seamless as possible,
Yep.
right? And so we're doing things like that, but we also understand, there's innovation happening in the industry, and we want to ensure that that we take account of that innovation, and if it makes sense to bring it back into the fold for consideration, because at the end of the day, for me, what's so important is backwards compatibility.
Yep.
You don't want to break enterprise investments you made from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, from 15, from 20 years ago. Like, that's still value, right? And if we inject anything that's modern that breaks that puts your business at risk. That just adds additional, cost structure to your entire enterprise. And I want a developer to be able to take, God forbid you're still using, 1.5 or 1.6 or 1.7. Shame on you. Get above the security baseline, folks. Why are you doing that? But I want you to be able to inherently take an old application and just be able to deploy it on
Right.
new versions as they come out as
Right.
seamlessly as possible. Now, nothing is 100% seamless. We know that because your app might have dependencies that has nothing to do with the language or the platform. You have to take into account your entire environment, understand what you've built into your solution. And this is an interesting discovery period that I'm seeing a lot of companies, especially those that are older than a year old. Because, like, how many dependencies do you have? Because you're probably changing dependencies every 6 months, if not
Right.
every 6 weeks or every other day. But as you become more established, as you become more foundational, have more structure, there's a lot of third party dependencies that slow people down.
Hmm.
And you got to understand and appreciate that that can also impact your business. It's not sometimes the platform you've chosen. And, so there's a lot of companies I talk to that have gone through that discovery
Right.
and have that, oh my God moment. I'm using a library that's no longer maintained. Oh, forgive me, doo doo. Like,
Yep.
like I
Yep.
don't like they have that moment of, oh my God,
How
what are
did
we
this happen?
doing? Yeah, like where's the Charmin toilet paper? We need cleanup in aisle 5. Like, it's dangerous.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. Well, speaking of name dropping, Spencer Gibbs with us. He says, "Hi, good afternoon, Spencer. Glad to have you here, buddy. We'll have to get your episode rescheduled. I've been meaning to reach out to you on that. But anyway, so if you have questions for us, Spencer, please, by all means, throw them in the chat. I'll do my best to try to work them in here today. That's an excellent point. I've been a part of some of those legacy refactoring kind of efforts or modernization efforts where you start kind of, it's like flipping on the light in in a really bad apartment and like everything runs under the fridge and you're like, oh my God, how did we get here? But that happens in a lot of organizations. It works. It nobody touch it. And it's only when you're forced to really dig into it that you realize we have a huge vulnerability here, or we have this surface area we didn't even realize. Like, are we even licensed for this? You know, we don't know because the company that we bought it from has since been acquired 7 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I kind of look at it as like your car. I know we're moving
Yeah.
away from like having cars. Like we have, none of us have probably driven because we're all, you know,
I drove today.
living in
I
our,
Ubered my
you drove.
child to soccer. So, you know, I
Oh,
realized parents were the original Uber, you know, or ride
yeah.
share, I should say. I should just say generic ride share.
You're looking at Daddy Uber in my household. So,
Yep. Yep.
depending on which child, but you know, when you look at your vehicle, your tires have only so much tread life.
Yep.
There's a reason why they say, you know, check the depth of your tread to ensure the performance of your overall application, which is your car. And guess what? Your car can keep running on thin treads, but at a certain point, the system's going to fail. And
Yes.
not just the tire. The entire application is going to now be put at risk.
Right.
There's security risks there. And I'm like, you know, the platforms you choose also have opportunities for upgrading because it's going to offer, you know, stronger sidewalls, better performance, more stability, you know, longer life of your overall application. It's like you may want to think about that in some ways. And you start putting that in context for end users, especially the decision makers, because sometimes the developer is different than the decision maker. And that's where I see a lot of
Often.
the disconnect. Like, oh my
Absolutely.
God, the person who's doing the procurement is not the person who's actually using the
No.
technology. And man, wouldn't it be great if there was less of a bridge between those two endpoints? And that's
100%.
why I love the new world we sort of live in. I mean, we've been living it in the Java space for so long, but developers have so much influence in in that initial purchase of decision. Like they are the true rainmakers in their company. We need to make developers understand that they have influence and power. Like we don't want them. I mean, we were kind of talking about this before you know, you hit the live button, which is how many companies have shadow infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like seriously, I go into so many conversations with customers and I'm like, well, so what platform are you using? What environment are you using? And you kind of know based on the parent contract the procurement team is signed. And I'm like, that's not what I see
Mm-mm.
here in production,
Mm-mm.
or where you're doing your testing and where you've built some of your CI/CD pipelines. And I'm like, do they know about it? Because if they
Nope.
don't know about it, you must have pivoted for some reason. And so I just feel like we as developers are more empowered in this uh, new landscape we live in because of the influence we have.
Yeah.
And that's important for us because that's career viability. Like you don't work in retail, you don't work in commerce, you don't work in fintech, you don't work in aviation, you work in the tech sector. Like
Yes.
every business is a technology company. Every single business technology company, which means you can port your expertise across the board to those companies that realize, hey, I matter.
No, that's a great point. And I think that's probably one of the biggest shifts I've seen in my career. You know, and I know I've told this story before, but when I first started, our CIO gave this presentation to the new hires, and he was very adamant that this is a financial services company. We are not a technology company. We are here to serve the business needs. We are a cost center, all that, right? Fast forward 20-ish years, I'm with a client, and their CIO gets up and says the exact opposite message. We are a technology company. We just happen to be in retail. Now, I realize that not all companies have completely embraced that, you know, not to the core of their culture, but it is definitely a realization that technology is driving the show. Whether that's convenient or not is kind of irrelevant, because if you want to be relevant today, you have to be able to do these things. It isn't just, well, that's a technology thing. Think about an app today that goes down for maintenance for 48 hours. One of my colleagues tweeted that out, some website down for maintenance, and she's like, "You're kidding me, right?" And I said, "Well, deployment strategies are not evenly distributed. You can't do that when that's what your competitors aren't down for 48 hours. How can you be down for 48 hours?" But I'll put my soapbox back under my desk
Oh,
here.
but but that's a fantastic point because it's not even legacy companies. You think about some of these modern cloud environments that still to this day have downtime or
Yeah,
outages. And you know, I'm not going to name the company. Just like a couple of weeks ago, the downtime brought down a significant portion of the internet.
yeah,
You know, for however long period that was. Like I can't imagine the cost that the companies that were reliant on that infrastructure that brought into the fold. And so it's not just about legacy companies that may have like what I would call outdated methodologies in terms of development and testing and ensuring that you have, systems to do, overlap when you're going into maintenance mode. It happens even in the new world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
It just does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it's important to, understand that we are all part of technology companies, which then means we're also people companies, because technology
Right.
is not possible without people, and you got to invest in your people. And the strongest teams that I'm starting to see or the companies that I'm seeing, are the ones that realize we got to invest in our people first.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about relationships, not just who we hire, but who we interact with as customers. People first, technology second, and that's how you get to like solutions that have stickiness.
Mm-hmm.
And bring it back to Java. The reason why I think, I get this question like, well, why has Java had so much success? Like, it's not just the engineering, right? And like, yeah, it's not just about what we build. It's the community around it.
Yes.
It's the ecosystem. And, I've seen analyst reports that say there's 12 million Java developers. Some say 14 million. And I'm sorry, but when you're in the 8 digits, that's a lot,
Yes.
right?
Yes, it is.
That's huge.
Right.
And think of just how much knowledge is there. It's the ecosystem that to me keeps Java relevant. So like we here at Oracle and inheriting the legacy from Sun, our job is to ensure we keep Java vibrant and modern and approachable and offers sort of like as best a solution set as possible that's horizontal as possible.
Yeah.
But where the real innovation happens is in the end users. And what I see is you see, now going back to there aren't industry segments, there's so much knowledge transfer happening, like in terms of best practices, in terms of use cases, that is what, makes us all better. Like there's over 300 Java user groups around the world that allow that sort of like collaborative spirit. We have the Open JDK project where the community can come and participate and give us feedback on what we're doing and help influence that pipeline of new features. And that's just been the DNA of Java since the beginning. And what I find kind of interesting is, the last 5 years especially, is companies are discovering that community matters, as if they've just discovered this new continent. And I'm
Right.
like, community, the notion of community that drives technology forward has been there for so long, but that's okay. Like, don't need the pat on the back. It's
Right.
just great to see companies finally realizing it will take a community to make a solution viable and sustainable. It's awesome, whether it's in Java or not. Like I
Right.
see other languages, other cloud environments, other cloud companies that are taking that community first spirit, which is fantastic. Like that just makes us all better.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think back to early in my career where we all take it for granted now that on almost any day of the week in any given city there's a meetup of some sort or another on some specific language, technology, database, whatever. I mean, obviously many of them are virtual now, which is kind of cool because you can go to places you wouldn't normally be able to go to. But when I first started, it was a Java user group, the Jugs, and I'm sure there were others, but that was kind of the big one, and all the major cities had a thriving Jug, and I think Java doesn't get enough credit for sort of really emphasizing that community aspect of this because every Jug I've ever been a part of was community driven. It was some local person who said, I'm going to help organize this and I'm going to stand
Right.
this up. And it's just people coming together to do that. And it's just remarkable to me. And, again, I think we kind of just take for granted that, well, of course there's a meetup today because it's a day ending in Y. It didn't used to be that way. And I think JCP factors into that too and other things.
Well,
But
the notion of especially what's happened last year from a world standpoint, with the pandemic, um, has given us visibility into how being online can connect us.
yeah,
But I still have to say this: that the best relationships start face to face, and then are extended digitally.
hmm,
So great that we have this ability to connect, through our computers. But at a certain point, that there's a human element here,
Yeah,
where even if you're connected, to sustain that relationship, there has to be sort of the opportunity to connect personally. And I'm starting to see that, even online, is we're going through this phase of apathy,
sure.
right? Like, how connected are you really by being on the screen? Like, we can turn off our cameras, which I can completely appreciate and understand why we would do that. Are they, truly engaged in the conversation? You can hit the mute button, and there are sometimes there's something to be said being in the same room with someone or a group of people to
Hmm.
really understand where I stand, where you stand. Did I really get it? Am I still confused? Are there still questions to be explored? And I feel as though, because we're constantly online, it's just like, okay, it's done. I've addressed it. And have I really addressed it? I don't.
Right.
I just don't think so. So for me personally, I'm looking to get back on the road, connecting at a level where we're in the presence of each other. I don't know how you feel about that, but boy, am I missing that connection.
Yeah, well, and that's part of why I spun up this show is I missed these kinds of conversations that I got to engage in on a regular basis with someone that I would bump into at an event, and I miss that, and I do think that normal is going to be different. We're not going back to the way things were in 2019, and that's
That's
why I
right.
think it's amazing to me these organizations who CEOs are now saying everybody's back in the office 5 days a week, no exception. I just think you are going to lose so well. In fact, I
Yeah.
know for a fact I ran into a former colleague of mine, and she was saying that their policy is going to be 3 days a week in the office, no exceptions. Even though her, the IT department's like, we don't need to do this. We can be work remote. Nope, nope, no exceptions. And she said people are quitting left and right. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see that turnover. And eventually, I hope companies realize that people enjoy this flexibility, and maybe the 1 to 3 hours a day folks spend commuting is better spent other ways. And for a lot of people, it was spent doing work, which I like, why would you give up on that extra time? But I don't know. I say that as someone who's been remote for 4.5 years. So, to me, this
I
wasn't.
so I've been remote since 2002. And Sun was one of those initial companies that understood the value of remote reporting, because the reality is talent doesn't exist in one location. Talent
Correct.
exists everywhere.
Yep.
So if you want to attract the optimal talent, you have to go to where the talent is and allow them to be there. Having that centralized um, location is detrimental, especially in this modern age. Uh, and the reality is, um, being remote gives you flexibility.
Yes.
And to me, there's a programming paradigm in there too. Your life flexibility from a work standpoint is the same things you want to do in terms of building out your app. You want your apps to be flexible. So why are we bringing rigid concepts into this notion of where people are located? And there is a challenge though, in
Hmm.
that there's a difference between working from home and living at work. And right now,
Yeah.
I feel as though we've been living at work because there haven't most companies haven't realized we have to set boundaries.
Yes.
We have to create environments that are productive, such that it's not always like being on 24/7, going from one Zoom meeting to the next Zoom meeting. No notion of break, no notion of decompression, no notion of me being allowed to then go focus on the priorities that I'm responsible for. I can't imagine how many people are doing offline work right now.
Right.
And that to me is setting folks up for burnout.
Yes.
And that's a dangerous proposition to be in. And so we have to understand that working from home has needs to have structure and definition and boundaries. Like, this will sound stupid. I have on my calendar eye breaks.
Yeah.
I have on my day 2 instances for 5 minutes to give myself an eye break. Because if I didn't do that, if I wasn't that rigid with my schedule, I would just keep on working. And I'm like, I need to give my eyes a break, because
Yeah.
otherwise I'd be in front of this little like tiny screen here all day. Because we need to refresh our mind,
Right.
stay fresh, and you know uh, every user group meeting I go with, I'm like, we're taking a break.
Yeah.
We will not go 30 minutes or an hour or 90 minutes. We're going to take a few breaks, even in the online sense. Like, I want all of you to go off camera for 5 minutes, go refresh your coffee, go take a bio break. Let's
Yep.
come back to the
Stretch your
conversation.
legs.
We are not going to just, grind through this, because I'm not doing you any service in that regard.
Yeah, years ago, I put 2 recurring meetings on my calendar at 10 and 2 to remind myself to stretch. You just need to get up from time to time. And you're absolutely right. Building those boundaries is hard, especially if you're not used to it. And I think we all eventually kind of craft our own approaches. One of the things that I've always done is I had a distinction between my work from home clothes, which my wife refers to as work from home pajamas, and lounge wear around the house. And as my son thinks it's trivial, like when he was doing school remotely, he just wore his pajamas all day, every day. Which I didn't realize till I did his laundry and there was like nothing in it. And I'm
Right.
like, well, this is it? And he's like, well, yeah, I just wear my pajamas. And I'm like, oh, okay, we need to have a talk. But
Yeah, but you know what?
it's a
You bring up a
distinction.
good point. You bring up a good point, which is as part of this sort of new world order, the new normal is we also have to invest in ourselves,
Yeah.
and not just personally, but professionally. Like,
Yep.
there has to be time where we're not just, you know, doing the task at hand. We need to keep ourselves relevant, right? Putting in time to ensure that we're viable.
Mm-hmm.
Going and looking at, what the new feature pipelines that'll be coming out in a next release, whether it's in Java or whatever other language or platform that you're utilizing. You got to invest in yourself, and you
Yeah,
need
it's
to
a great
create that
point.
space and schedule that space. And so we try to do that transparently, so a lot of developers don't have to go do that investigation. So all of our innovation in Java is, it's done transparently out in the
Yeah.
open. Folks can just go to the Java project at openjdk.java.net. Like, everything we do is out in the open. Every developer can look at the code check-ins and see the conversation and what decision was made. And if you choose to participate, you have the chance to jump in. And that, to me, only leads to better innovation if you make it more inclusive. And that, I know we're tying a lot of topics together here, but to me, that's part of the opportunity we have, is like,
Right.
with this time at home, gives me a chance to invest in myself and look at the projects and look at the technologies that are out there and do some of that exploration. And, if I desire, participate more. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who could have imagined 30 or 40 years ago that developers would be able to set the target of the future of the
Right.
thing that they are using? That's what I mean by rainmakers, not just at your company, but you're a rainmaker in terms of what you're using. And man, I constantly let, members of Java user groups, or whenever we do community engagements, to let them know this isn't rigid. Like, what we build is based on what your needs are. And it's easy to do what's popular. Like, we want to make sure we take accountability of, does use cases have transferability across all the multitude of applications that are out there? So, I mean, it would be easy to inject something that's cool. I just
Right.
want to make sure I don't damage things that have already been built. And, that's why I'm so thankful for both Mark and Brian, that while they have that eye on the future, they want to ensure that, things in the past don't get broken by what they build out. And, we do everything very thoughtfully, very thoughtfully. It's
Yes.
not always about being new. It's about being relevant. There's a distinction there.
Absolutely. Well, we talked about that a little in the pre-show, but I know it's a conversation I've had with Brian that folks don't realize how intertwined these things are, and how to you it may seem trivial just to add this feature, and it may be just on the surface until you realize how that impacts excuse me, every other feature that's already there. And Brian and Mark, they have to think bigger than just my one little pet use case here, and what does that mean? And that's hard to do. That's not something that you can just sort of whip together on a Tuesday afternoon and deploy it. You got to kind of noodle through, well, what about this, what about that? And that's what a lot of people I don't think appreciate about this. There's a lot of
Well,
moving
yeah,
parts.
there are a lot of couch architects.
Yes, yes.
I think that I'm still, and wasn't my term. I'm stealing from you. I'm borrowing. I'm leveraging from you.
Absolutely.
Repurposing. I'm repurposing code here. But what's important is that once we make a decision to bring in a new feature or enhance the language or platform, developers have to understand is that we then have to maintain that for the life of the project.
Yep.
And maintaining something that hasn't been thought through then creates friction for you as the end user.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the end of the day, the last thing I want to inject is adding something that is cool, but then impacts performance, impacts stability, impacts security. Like if there's any risk that it causes harm in those three ways, is it really worth introducing
Right.
until everything has been thought through?
Right.
And you got to look at it from those lenses, because like we said, 12 million, 14 million users out there. Like, do I want to inject harm into what you're using? And what your use case is today is going to be different than the use case from someone else in a different industry. Like there's differences there. There's different libraries you're dependent on, different, how you've architected your application might be different. Your underlying infrastructure is going to be inherently different. And we are on the Java team have a responsibility to do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
We do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know that rubs people the wrong way. Someone's like just get it in. I'm like,
There are consequences to moving fast and
yeah,
breaking things, and
yeah.
that might work in certain environments, but I don't want my platform to be shifting underneath my feet while I'm trying to deliver value on top of it.
Yeah. So we have a kind of a very loose saying is think thoughtfully, build responsibly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that takes out the notion of speed.
Right. Well,
Um,
and it's important to understand that there are future ramifications for some of these decisions. I worked on an application for a while where a chunk of the code base was generated from models. I think you probably remember that era of software. We thought that was going to be the answer. We're going to draw pictures and hit generate, and the code comes out the other end, and that'll be the solution. And I know that gave that project leverage in the beginning. But by the time I got there, it was a boat anchor, and it meant builds took forever, and it was incredibly common to go into one of the generated classes, not put your fix in the right place, and have it get blown away when the regeneration runs. And that led to I don't know how many countless breaks and whatnot. And but you get to that stage where it's like, yeah, we didn't think through that, or we thought it was just going to be a temporary thing, and then it turns out to be permanent. And now you're stuck maintaining it for years. What does that do to your ability to turn around changes for your customers? So you got to be a little more thoughtful, and it's hard to do.
what I find interesting also in this environment we now live in is how many new things have been discovered. And it just takes a little bit of historical research to realize that some of these new discoveries are just a re-implementation or an evolution of a historical concept. I'll give you one. SOA, like service orchestrated architectures, has just been rebranded in
Yeah,
this new world we live in. I'm
yeah,
like, oh, you mean SOA? And then someone's like, what? Well, what's SOA? And then I describe SOA, and it's like, oh, you mean microservices? I'm like, it's just a different term. Like we
yeah.
just seem to shift terminology based on the evolution of history.
Right. Well, and that wasn't even the first time we tried distributed computing. We had these things called enterprise Java beans. I remember those. And
That's
and then
right.
before that, there's this thing called I think it was Corba.
Corba.
And then you go back far enough, and you see the demo, and you realize, oh, they were doing distributed computing back in the 60s. They just didn't call it that. So yeah, our industry is fantastic at I'm going to take this thing that we've done before, and I'm just going to kind of dust it off a little bit, rename it, and maybe change the paint, and then look, brand new. No one's ever done anything like this ever before.
Yeah. Well, so that's another good point to bring up is I do, and this might be me being getting up on my soapbox, but
Here, you
I
can borrow
I
mine.
believe in yeah, I inherently believe all of us as developers have a responsibility not only to do no harm and build responsibility, but that only comes from doing history, like
Yeah,
understanding your history, because history matters. If you forget history, you're bound to make more mistakes, and it's upon all of us to kind of do that investigation. Um, and without that, you have no foundation. You just don't. And
hmm
that's what I believe. That's what I love about Java. It's like it has such deep roots. It has a strong foundation. The trunk is stable. We have new branches that are constantly growing, but those new branches only come because of that structure. And
right.
a lot of innovation is starting with the branch level versus the foundation. Like, how can I grow the fastest? Like, well, you know what? You gotta water and prune and fertilize and do all of those things required to create that solid base. And you just can't skip a lot of steps.
Right.
Everyone wants to skip steps for speed, but be
Right.
careful. Speed can do harm.
Yeah. Yeah. Speed kills in various ways. Athletically, it's great, but you got to be careful on your software projects. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think that,
but this starts up the food chain, right? Like
yeah,
everyone is pushing down, like let's do this, let's get this done faster. And when you do things faster, you start making trade-offs
right.
that can inject uh, significant problems down the road that are not visible at the moment. But 3 years from now, everyone's sort of like moved on from this project, and then
Right.
that risk is then inherited by someone else. And for some reason, I just feel like that procurement team, so at some points, the CTO and even at the architect level has to understand that it's not always about speed; it's about stability.
Yeah. Well, it's that old project management adage. You've got three choices. You got scope, you got quality, uh, and I'm going to do the oops thing. I can't remember the third one, but pick two, and you don't get to modify all three of them. So if you're going to tell me this is my scope, well then I got to tell you what the time is, or we're going to have to cut quality, and we probably don't want to cut quality. It's probably a bad idea. That's really short-sighted, but I've had so many of those debates with people about, we'll just get it done faster, or I'm going to prove Brooks wrong and we're going to put more bodies on the project and that's going to solve it. And it's like, my gosh, people, can't we learn from the past? But we seem incapable of not doing that, or we seem incapable of doing that, excuse me. And I just don't get why.
But that's why it's so inherent on those of us that appear to get it, to ensure that we're making that conversation as inclusive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like touching back on Java, like we want to get as much participation as possible. And it's not just in ensuring that helps with building out a better project, or better, language choices or better features. Inclusion at every level makes us a better community. And this goes beyond just a notion of programming. I just sort of feel as though we kind of self-select. Like right now, we're talking in some aspects about Java. The things we're talking about are across many languages,
Absolutely.
many ideas, many concepts. And if we can just collectively as developers say, hey, we're part of the developer community. That sometimes rubs people the wrong way. It's like, no, I'm going to opt in because I'm a Java developer, I'm a Kotlin developer, I'm a Scala developer, or I'm a Ruby developer, I'm a Rust developer. I'm like, we need to ensure we have understanding of those other options. You may not use it, you may not implement it, but give fair opportunity to understand that there's other ideas that are out there. And we collectively, as the developer community, if we come together and share, we're going to make all of those platforms and languages that much better. Mm-hmm. We just are. And I just wish we would do that in our user groups, in our meetups, at our conferences. I so wish we had more diversity in terms of representation and in terms of thought.
Right.
Because if we're all thinking the same, we ain't thinking.
Right.
We just ain't.
And to your point, you see this where we keep kind of reinventing the same solutions in different frameworks instead of learning from each other. And and I've seen this. You mentioned Ruby. I remember when Rails first came on the scene. Ruby is an elegant language. I love Ruby. I was enjoyed the heck out of playing around with Ruby, and Rails I thought was extremely innovative in many ways. But you look at how Rails grew, and it's like, oh yeah, that was the same problem we had with Java when we were doing servlets. So you'll get there, and yeah, it was really simple when you could ignore a lot of the edge cases and a lot of the issues. Now that you're starting to run into those and have to fix it, all of a sudden that surface area got a little bigger, didn't it? It's not quite as skinny as it was in the past. But we see him again almost just incapable of that in this industry, and it's frustrating, and it's one of those things that I try to fix, right, as an architect. And I think I get this question a lot: how much experience should you have before you become an architect? Like, how many years should you be a developer? And my stock answer, and I'm sure I stole this from Neil or Mark, was you should have been on a project long enough to have seen the consequences of your decisions.
Yep.
And it's so easy to be on a project for a year and then skip onto something else and not realize that decision you made was really bad or really great.
Right.
So Yeah, I think that's the fundamental root is it's so easy to move on once things get a little ugly that we don't have to deal with the messes we make sometimes.
But that's the thing is that mental framework of that release cycle is once it's out, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then you mentally have to, or sometimes forced to move on. But to see the impact of that release is where you have some of that learning. And so it's kind of like a long tail a little
Yeah.
bit. There has to be some absorption of what has happened once it's been released. And there's no way I sometimes feel like it takes a different mental framework to be an architect. I
Hmm.
don't have that. I'm not wired that way. It definitely takes a special approach, and having it's almost like you're an ambassador,
Yeah.
because an ambassador has to hear both the good and the bad, and then balance all of that
Right.
from as many different voices as possible without insulting anyone. But
Hmm.
then at the end of the day, try to make quote unquote the right decision.
Yep. Yeah.
That uh, you're an ambassador, and that just takes some special skills that I know I'm lacking.
That's a fascinating way of looking. But you're right too, because it's also that communication between disparate groups and trying to read the room in both cases and like, all right, well, this is how I have to describe this to you to make sure you don't run for the hills, and this is I need to be able to get this message across with influence, and I can't just make you do it. And it's a fascinating set of concerns, I guess. So
Well, that's why I keep harping back to I really would love to see developers of all kind, especially Java developers, getting more involved in the actual technology that they're using. I mean, we have Java 17, which are our next release coming out in September. Yeah, it's just right around the
oh my
corner.
god.
Folks still have, they can. One of the joys I love about our open development is, a lot of developers ask, "What's the easiest way for me to get started?" We have early access releases for all of our releases. Like, go down and download an early access build. Does it work? Did it break anything? What's your opinion? At least share that feedback at a very minimum, and we can take that into account, let alone all of the other complex ways that you can also participate or that require either more time and effort. But I just want to see more participation, because the more you as the end user uh, are active in the ecosystem, it just allows us to then produce a better product for you to utilize and implement and make part of your solution set. And hey, Java 18, there's already early access builds out, ships in March of 2022. Start downloading, give me feedback, man. I know Brian would love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know?
Well, and as we talked about in the pre-show too, that's one of the most remarkable things about Java is the fact that you can influence it. Your voice is part of the process. So take advantage of that, leverage that.
Yep. And it doesn't have to necessarily just be at the Open JDK project, or participating at the actively participation in the JCP. It could just mean going to a meetup and sharing your knowledge with a
Right.
peer. That's so beneficial. Or more importantly, just being at the watering hole to listen.
Hmm.
Right, because you yourself can absorb so much just being at that listening post. And so it just requires time. We all got to like
Right.
structure the time, ensure that we are investing in ourselves. It's our viability that matters, and if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of influence, if you are in the Spring ecosystem, you can influence us too by
That's
filling out
right.
that survey. So please do that. I just retweeted that last night, I think. And actually, Brian chimed in. It's like, hey, I want
Yes, you
this.
did.
And I'm like, oh, cool. All right. What's
Yep.
going on here? Let's give me the popcorn. I want to see what Brian has to say about this.
Well,
So,
that's what I love about this. It's like you have a foundational platform. You have so many different frameworks that are out there. Choice matters, and Spring is one of them. And you set the bar for something that has become almost the standard.
hmm.
And it's important that although you want to also have choice is great. Ensuring that those that have stabilized continue to offer value. So yeah, I would say to everyone, go fill out the survey too, because I'm on the hook to fill it out myself.
There
So
you go. There you go.
I got to get it done.
Well, I know you got a hard stop, so
I do,
I
I
do
do.
not want to end this conversation. I'm gonna have you back on because I have
Appreciate it.
so
Hey,
many more
maybe
things.
maybe after Java 17 gets, so the release date is September 14th. Look for it, put on your calendar, circle it. Binaries will be available. You can download it.
Be here before you
And
know it.
but yeah, be here. I will blink and it'll be. If you want to know why I got to drop, there's so much planning that's still going on to get that released out the door. But yeah, after September 14th, I'd love to come back.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I appreciate
Awesome.
it. Thanks so much for your time. Next week, I've got Jasmine from Microsoft will be with
Cheers.
us. I'm very excited about that. Cheers, everybody.